Hi there, David. Thanks for joining us on Full Story.
Hi, Nour. Great to be here.
It is getting quite late there in Washington. We're talking to you just hours after these talks wrapped up. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenksyy was at the White House to push back against any plan that would allow Russia to take Ukrainian territory. He was flanked by half a dozen of his European allies. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, it was an extraordinary gathering, and I think a measure of the degree of concern among European leaders about that meeting last Friday between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Some would call it panic. Some would call it just taking safe and solid, sensible measures for all these European leaders to really drop everything and race to Washington. There's certainly not been anything like that, I think, since the Iraq war 20 years ago. They really wanted to show their solidarity with Volodymyr Zelenksyy and really make sure there was not a repeat of that dreaded meeting in the Oval Office last February, in which it was really a shakedown of Zelenskyy and he left empty-handed. And to that degree, at least, they were successful.
Before we talk about what happened at the White House, I do want to talk to you about that summit in Alaska between the Russian president and the US president. A lot has been written about the dynamics of that encounter. You were there. Can you talk to me about what you witnessed on the outskirts of Anchorage, Alaska?
It's my first time in Alaska. I got to the airport at about 1:30 in the morning, was greeted by a stuffed bear in a glass case, a trophy apparently hunted by the governor of Alaska. About 4 hours later, hundreds of reporters were loaded onto buses by the US military and taken to an Air Force base under the mountains, under a big sky. Lots of grassy areas, lots of housing and children's playgrounds. An Air Force base is like a small city, and this one was actually used during the Cold War against Russia because, geographically we were very close to Russia, obviously, and it was in that sense a fairly easy hop for Vladimir Putin to get there. I think the first real spectacle was Trump and Putin stepping off their planes at almost the exact same moment. A red carpet had literally been rolled out for Vladimir Putin. Trump stopped and waited for him. Trump even burst into some spontaneous applause for Putin as he approached, which is, I think, pretty stunning to many observers, mindful that Putin has been indicted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, particularly over the abduction of thousands of Ukrainian children. He's accused of many crimes, of having blood on his hands by human rights groups, and yet here was the so-called leader of the free world, greeting him very warmly, walking with him to the presidential limousine known as the Beast. And then they went off for talks. It took about 2 or 3 hours, and Putin and Trump emerged. And then another surprise, Vladimir Putin actually spoke first. That allowed Putin to really set the framing, the terms of reference for what had happened. Trump spoke second. It was only about 4 minutes. And I think everyone in that room, hundreds of journalists, expected a typical Trump press conference, very freewheeling, many questions, many answers. To all of our surprise, he just wound it up there, taking no questions at all. It wasn't really a press conference. Putin joked about the next meeting being in Moscow, and they left the stage, and everyone was somewhat dumbfounded. And the following day, we learned, Trump seemed to have adopted at least some of Putin's talking points about this war.
And David, I do want to talk about that in just a minute. But as you noted earlier, the last time the Ukrainian president was in the US, there was a messy and frankly embarrassing confrontation that played out in full view of the press inside the Oval Office. I was hoping you could contrast the meetings between these world leaders for us. Can you talk to me about the tone and tenor of the meeting that took place at the White House today?
Yeah, I think the prevailing mood in Washington today is a huge sigh of relief, and the same is true across Europe as well. Everyone feared a sequel to Trump and Zelensky. That was a diplomatic disaster, and Zelensky was standing his ground, pushing back, and in the end was effectively booted out of the White House empty-handed. Work has been done since then to repair the relationship, and Monday did go a lot better. Notably, Zelensky began the meeting with very effusive thanks for the invitation and for US support. I think he'd learned that particular lesson, and he also presented a letter from his wife to Donald Trump's wife, Melania, who had previously written a letter to Putin about the plight of children in this conflict. And that really set the tone for a much warmer, more cordial meeting. You could see it in the body language. Donald Trump, people often say about him, he never laughs. And actually, there were even moments during this meeting where you could see him laughing a couple of times about one thing or another, including the clothes that Zelensky was wearing. Again, that had been a flashpoint 6 months ago. He was wearing his characteristic military fatigues, and this time he was more smartly dressed in something approaching a suit, although not a classic suit and tie. And the very same right-wing pro-Trump reporter who had raised that issue 6 months ago mentioned it again, and perhaps not least importantly, this time J.D. Vance was sitting in the same spot of the couch, but he remained silent, and that helped to keep things on track.
As you mentioned earlier, after Donald Trump's meeting with Putin, he, changed his tune on some pretty significant things in relating to this war. Talk to me about Trump's position on a ceasefire and how that's shifted, and what Zelensky and European leaders have had to say about that.
Yeah, last week I went to another Trump event, this time at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And while he talked about Kennedy Center honors and so on, obviously a lot of that press conference also turned to Ukraine. And Trump was asked if Putin does not agree to a ceasefire during this Alaska meeting, what will happen? And Trump said there would be very severe consequences for that. As we saw on Friday, Putin indeed did not agree to a ceasefire, and yet there was no hint of consequences at all. In fact, Trump was very positive and upbeat about Putin, and has reiterated in subsequent remarks, including on Monday in the Oval Office with Zelensky, that he's no longer pushing for this immediate ceasefire. He instead prefers the idea of working towards a long-term peace deal that would be lasting. And part of his logic for that is Trump claims to have resolved half a dozen wars already during his term. Some would dispute that, but he says in those instances it was not about a ceasefire, it was about something more fundamental. And during a meeting with European leaders in the East Room, it was Chancellor Merz in particular who seemed to offer some pushback on that, and he argued that a ceasefire is still a very important component of this. To him, it would be unthinkable to have a second meeting without a ceasefire being in place. He said we should still pressure Russia on that. Trump, in his response, was relatively polite, but seemed to suggest, well, this is for Putin and Zelensky to thrash out between them. Emmanuel Macron of France also spoke of a truce and a need to stop the killing. So there did seem to be some daylight there between Trump and the European leaders. And of course, arguably, all of this plays into Vladimir Putin's hands. For as long as he avoids a ceasefire, he can continue waging this war. Even on Monday itself, Ukraine was bombed. At least 10 people were killed, including a young child. It suits Putin to play for time.
Now, David, there have been many reports that Putin wants Ukraine to surrender the Donbass, that's in the east of Ukraine, in exchange for peace. Why does Putin want full control of that region? And is that something that President Trump is amenable to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Donbass, among other things, is rich in natural resources. It would be a valuable gain for Russia, just beyond the sheer symbolism of Putin wants as much land as possible. We have seen, I think, some conflicting reports, at least by one account, during Friday's meeting. This was a red line for Trump. He was not willing to concede the Donbass to Putin, and even was reportedly suggesting he was ready to walk away from the meeting if Putin stuck to that. There are other accounts, and we've that maybe Trump is amenable to a deal, as he would describe it, where Russia claims the Donbass region and then freezes the military lines in two other regions that are disputed. And in all the conversations on Monday, certainly the public ones, we didn't hear much about that from Trump or the European leaders. Those were the kinds of specifics that it sounds like they didn't want to make public. A point worth remembering about all this is that even if Volodymyr Zelenksyy, for whatever reason, agreed that was a good idea, and maybe we can surrender the Donbass, it's not in his gift to do so. The Ukrainian constitution mandates that the people would have to have a referendum on that issue.
What about security guarantees? What could they look like?
That was a much more prominent topic, at least in the public remarks that we heard today, when Trump sat with the European leaders, alongside, of course, the inevitable flattery that they all gave him, giving him credit for all of this, which is the way that you play Trump. Many of them emphasize the importance of some US-backed security guarantees. Giorgia Meloni of Italy, who perhaps has some sway with Trump, given that she too is a right-winger and they get on well. She was saying, we need security guarantees in place because, otherwise the worst case scenario is, 2 years down the line, Russia just invades again. Macron of France, again, emphasized the importance of security guarantees, and he said that starts with a strong, robust Ukrainian military for years or decades to come, which presumably would require some investment from the allies. And it also must involve Europe stepping up to its responsibilities, being mindful of the fact that all of this is happening on Europe's doorstep. So it's not just in Ukraine's interests, but the European continent as a whole. And through the day, we had evolving and shifting comments from Trump about what US involvement in security guarantees might be. He talked about certainly protecting Ukraine and Europe. In the Oval Office, he was asked about could there be US troops on the ground. He certainly swerved past that question and said, well, we'll talk about that, maybe say something later. In a social media post, he wrote about Europe providing these guarantees and the US coordinating them, whatever the word coordinate might mean. But certainly afterwards, someone like Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, he said, many details still have to be discussed, but seemed relatively optimistic about it.
Over the last 3.5 years, more than 13,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine, close to 300 in the last month alone. Have these talks actually brought us any closer to an end to this war?
That, I think, is the ultimate question, and the more I study it and report on it, I feel like the less I know. I mean, I think to look at the glass as half full, Monday was a very impressive show of European solidarity, and indeed European and US solidarity. You had all these leaders together at a time when there are great fears for the future of the transatlantic alliance, and much has been said about Trump's America First isolationism and so on. Here at least all these leaders were in the same room and, to a degree, singing from the same hymn sheet, and sort of pulling in the same direction. And at least Trump is engaged with this issue. At least it's happening. And at least the meeting with Zelenskyy went much better than February, although some might say that's setting the bar low. The general line from NATO is, thank you, Donald Trump, for energizing the situation, for at least breaking the stalemate and getting Putin talking and so on. There is, however, a whole nother way of looking at it, which is that Vladimir Putin is winning in certain respects. He has not made any concessions at all over the last 3 years or so, and Trump seemingly has not asked him to make any concessions, and that's rather bleak. And there's a great danger here of a bully being rewarded with at least some territory. It's very notable in all of Monday's discussions, as in other days. Trump never seems to say Russia is the aggressor here, Russia is morally wrong. What about the thousands of children? What about the loss of innocent life? His language is strangely neutral and morally equivocal, given the atrocities that Russia has committed. So it feels like we're sadly still in the foothills. It's still early days. And based on what happened on Friday, the way Trump gave Putin such legitimacy, a man who'd become a global pariah, the way Trump welcomed him back onto the world stage, there are still plenty of reasons to be worried.
David, there have been some suggestions that Zelenskyy and Putin could meet. Is it clear if that will happen?
Trump himself posted on social media about that. The German Chancellor and the British Prime Minister both seemed to confirm that Trump had called Putin and Putin had agreed to that bilateral meeting. However, the German Chancellor sounded some caution about, will Putin actually do it? Will he have to be pressured? Notably, the Kremlin has not yet confirmed that meeting is happening. So we still have to get that one done. And then supposedly, in theory, after that, there would be a trilateral meeting where Trump himself would attend. But right now that feels somewhat provisional.
Okay, so we'll be waiting to see if we'll ever see Zelenskyy and Putin in the same room over the coming weeks. David, it's been a massive couple of days for you there in the US. Thanks so much for your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.